Record. 3, 2, 1. Good evening, dear friends. Right now, we are merging the present, cyberspace, and the future, all as one, as we embark on another exciting installment of our course, Book Smart, covering 3,300 plus years of Jewish literacy. We've gone from the beginning. We talked about the Bible, the Torah, the written and the oral. We talked all about the Midrash and the way our sages extract Jewish knowledge, history, law, ethics from the written 24 books of the Tanakh, of the Torah, of the Bible. Last week, we talked all about the oral tradition, how it is best captured and summarized in shorthand in the Mishnah, and then lengthily elaborated upon in the Gemara or the Talmud. We even talked about the two different works, the Jerusalem Talmud, an aborted mission, which is a little more straightforward, less dialogue, and the lengthy, contentious debates that are presented and preserved for us for all time in the Babylonian Talmud. These are all very, very important topics. But now is where stuff gets real. Because, they talk about the rabbi who's sitting with two congregants, and they're having an argument, and the rabbi's wife, the Rebbitzin, walks by and she hears the rabbi tell the man to his right, who's making some big complaint. He says, "You're right." And then the other man says, no. And he says, "You're right." So the Rebbitzin peeks her head and says, "Honey, how can they both be right?" He says, "You're also right." So we know two Jews, three opinions. And the Talmud really preserves that for us. Those who join our daily Talmud discussion group know that we capture and review vigorous, constant debate. But when it comes to the bottom line, when it comes to what a Jew is to do, what is the Jewish way? What is the Jewish Torah instruction? There, we need to abandon the diversity of opinion and choose a specific way in life. And this is true not only in halacha, but throughout life. We need to always be mindful, considerate, aware of different ways and styles. But then when it comes to execution, what we're going to do, you need to choose one pathway. And halacha, although this is not the entirety of halacha, halacha is going to take us to that path of going from many ideas, all authentic, all important, all part of our tradition, and get down to a single way to act. And so, once again, welcome to our discussion about the Jewish library, Jewish literacy. And tonight, you have here on your screen and in your book, if you'll pull out your map one more time, just to identify what tonight's discussion will be all about. And tonight, we're focusing on the orange line, the line that's called halachic works, spanning on this larger map, and we'll see soon how we're going to actually shorten it a bit, from approximately 300 or so, right? Is that what we're doing over here? All the way to the modern era. Lesson 4, the orange color, that is our discussion, that is halacha. And of course, you'll notice, and we'll point out, that it really very much picks up or gains a lot of steam once we finish and close the chapter on the era of the Talmud. But I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. So let's back up and talk about the word halacha. If you've been in a Jewish environment, if you've studied Jewish scholarship, if you've entered or joined a discussion of various Jewish groups, denominations, likely you are to hear the word halacha. But what is that word halacha? So if you have your book with you, and Sheila, I know you have your, I've got your book.
Yeah,
you turn to
thank you.
Text, if you turn to text 1, page 148. So we have a verse in Exodus that reads as follows: "Instruct them on the statutes and the teachings. Make known to them the way on which they should go and the actions that they should do." The way to go.
We got that.
The way to go. The Hebrew word for That is haderech asher yelchu, the way to go. Okay, so we understand that there is a way. But now let's go to the interpretation of the Maharal, one of the great Jewish scholars and philosophers, and let's see what he describes about the way of the Torah. The word Torah means instruction, like the word Hora'ah. That should be familiar. If you were here lesson 1, we talked about how the Torah describes the broad body of Jewish knowledge as well as the specific work of the written Torah. Because the Torah's function is to instruct us in the actions that we should do. And that's why the 5 books of Moses are called the Torah. They contain the mitzvot. So although we haven't yet used the word halacha, we understand that one of and the most important role of the entire Torah is to give us prescriptions for how a person is to conduct themselves, how a person is meant to live. The Torah is a lot of things. It's our wisdom, our history, our culture, our intellectual curiosity. But if we had to boil it down to its most essential component, it's instruction. So the Talmud we showed last week, and here let's catch up on the slides as well. So halacha, the laws that instruct our daily lives, is the most simple and appropriate translation for the word halacha. Because Torah means instruction. And although the Torah includes many parts, which we discussed and spent much of our time the past few weeks, a most essential part is the way the Torah provides concrete guidance for how to go. The word halacha, what is the definition of the word halacha? Well, we talked about a path to go upon. Halacha means like lech, halicha, going or the way. And so halacha describes the facet of the Torah that tells a person how to go and where to go. Not literally, but conceptually, where to go and how to behave. It's a pathway. Sometimes you'll even hear a description, and I don't really like it, but just to illustrate the point, you'll hear talking about people going on the derech, on the way. And I don't like the way that's used in the more specific contemporary idea. But the notion that there is a prescribed direction or way that a Jew can live, that's the idea of halacha. That's where halacha comes in. Halacha is the mechanism to decide what you should actually do. Many views can be sustained, preserved, recorded when it comes to our joy and thrill for acquiring knowledge, hashing things out. But in practice, halacha, it's going to boil down to one instruction, one idea. What does halacha address? What facets of Jewish life? Short answer, you want to give a shout out? What do you think halacha addresses? Everything. Everything.
Oh, everything.
Halacha addresses everything, meaning every facet of life, but also some very, very wild and diverse questions. If you'll join me, for those that have a book, and actually I'm going to share this on the screen too, page 150. If you don't mind turning to page 150, and here we have a sampling of wild questions, queries that were, I'm sorry, don't get vertigo as I scroll to the page. Wild questions and queries that were presented to, and questions that need to be clarified. Now, every one of these topics that you're going to see on the map could warrant an entire discussion. So I know we're going to want to discuss in detail. But if we'll just go very fast to the top. Atlanta. Rabbi Tobias Geffen in 1935 is asked, is Coca-Cola kosher? I'm not going to give you the answer, but I'm going to let you know the question is asked. Erev Tov. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Oh, are you okay? Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, New York, 1977. Conjoined twins share a single 6-chambered heart. To separate them would save one of their lives, but kill the other. Can we make this life-saving, but life-sacrificing operation? What about medical volunteers responding to emergencies? Are they allowed to drive home if the emergency is no longer urgent? Well, then you go all the way back in time, 1699, worms. If a woman commits adultery, she's afraid she's pregnant, Can she terminate her pregnancy using a potion? Very timely, but this was a question back then. When calculating one's earnings, can you deduct your business expenses? Can you deduct your overhead? That's an important question. Well, let's go to Spain. 1275. Can you put a donor's name on a synagogue that he donated? What if he wants to put a big statue? The Muscovy duck, a New World species, is that kosher? I know every single one of these questions would get a whole evening. And Giveret, I'm sure you have the answers to many, but right now we're just dropping questions. Manchester, 1970, are organ transplants allowed according to Jewish law? What about artificial insemination? Can you take a photograph? Is that like making a graven image? Matzahs were made in the time of Moses till a modern era by hand. Can you use a machine matzah? Can you flip an electric switch on Shabbat? It's not fire. That was a question asked in Poland, in Lvov. Well, today it's not Poland. Today it's Ukraine, but then it was Poland. Tiberius. Can we make a new calendar with a new Sanhedrin? Humpadita, that's in Iraq. 992. Can you pray in Aramaic? Or do you have to use Hebrew? Can you travel on Shabbat to keep up with a caravan? Or do you need to essentially risk death, isolation, abandonment in a desert? Let's just grab two more and then we're going to move on. A patient died during a surgery, removing bladder stones in Prague, 1760. Can we do an autopsy for the medical knowledge? 1760 as well. Can you hunt for sport? Mantua. Can a Jew wear a doctor's cape? Or is that considered an un-Jewish practice? We wouldn't have that question today, but it was once a question, and it was answered. Want to guess what the answer was? Well, doctors, in those days, if you were a doctor, you put on some schmancy clothing. So today, it's not a question. Physicians wear medical scrubs all the time. But it was the first time that they had a Jewish doctor in the modern context, and they wanted to know, could he wear this Jewish uniform? So obviously, the answer is yes. I know I said I'm not going to do that. Johannesburg, Rabbi Sternbach, what's the blessing for chocolate? Is it Hadama? Because it's from a berry or a bean? Is it Shehakol? I know you're thinking, obviously it's Shehakol, but there's reasons why it's not so obvious. Can you own stock in a company that's not kosher?
That's interesting.
Rabbi Avadia Yosef in Israel, can you release terrorists in exchange for hostages in Entebbe? That was before the operation. Can you walk past the camera to be recorded on Shabbat? Anything else? I think we covered a lot of topics. All of these very diverse, wild, thought-provoking questions asked and answered in the context of halacha. So let's zoom back at him for a minute. As you can see, Jewish law has considered and contemplated many, many wild. By the way, I want to introduce you to fellow Torontonians. Anyways, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But so let's look at the screen again for a moment. And as you'll notice, once upon a time, Jewish literature, when I say once upon a time, Bible, Talmud, was pretty diverse. There was a commingling of different types of Jewish knowledge. So in the Bible, you'll read history, God's admonishment via prophets. You'll read about the story of the Jewish people, ethics. What else? Technology, maybe a little bit. The Talmud, we said last week, Agadah, tales, debates, ethics, history. What else? I know a million different topics. There was a great commingling of Jewish knowledge, which is wonderful. All of a sudden, at approximately the year 500-600, after the close of the Talmud, a new genre develops, a genre that we might describe as specialized work. Halachic literature at the close of the Talmud begins to develop because to know information in the Talmud, to know what to do, the law is intermingled, dispersed all across the Talmud, and many times the Talmud doesn't actually tell you how to act. It'll give you many opinions. It'll give you a debate, many reasons and rationales behind different opinions, but it's all blended and complex and not all concluded. And that's where halacha steps in. The raw material of halacha is across the Talmud and the Midrash, but eventually it needs to all be collected, sorted, and presented in a more actionable and immediate way. And so what we're going to do today, first things first, is we're going to do a small exercise and examine a text, the way a discussion is presented in Mishnah, and then again, the way it's reorganized in an important early work of Halacha. And so you have the Talmudic era where it's recorded, all the Halacha, Jewish laws recorded in the Talmud. And then we have the post-Talmudic era, which is when halachic literature to figure out how to act, begins to really be organized, scrutinized, clarified, and crystallized to the point where a Jew today might say, oh, yes, you got a mezuzah. Where do you put the mezuzah? Which side of the door do you put the mezuzah? Which height? Which angle? All those details are then clarified, crystallized in halacha. The Talmud, okay, we just said this, but anyways, just to go see on this slide, the Talmud includes the raw material, and it's organized after the close of the Talmud into many different works of halacha. So what we're going to do now is talk about the very first subject that's discussed in the work called the Mishnah. And it's a discussion about a very, very well-known Jewish prayer. Well, Lauren, what's the most well-known Jewish prayer? The Shema. Very good. Okay. So when and how do you say the Shema? Well, it was probably conveyed to the Jewish people in the Bible. And Moses gave a presentation orally and said, hey, folks, here's how and when and the way to do Shema. And for a very long time, that was conveyed in an oral tradition till Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, says, hey, it's time to write this down in a text called the Mishnah. And so what we're going to do now is I'd like to ask you to turn to page 153, where we're going to actually see the language. Well, really 152, 153 is where the English text of the Mishnah discussing the Shema. Masechet Brachot, Mishnah 1. Chapter 1, Mishnah. Let's read it in English. Here we go. From when do we read Shema in the evening? Anything strange about that line real fast? Don't get no pilpulim, but anything strange about that line? Yes. What's strange? One sentence. What's strange? Before that. No, before. The first line. Where do we?
From the creation of the world.
What's weird about that?
You had many questions. First of all, Matai, why you say me Matai? Why you said Lama?
Because you're asking. Okay.
Why you say me Matai?
Can I back up a second? Who says you're supposed to say Shema? The Mishnah starts and says, me Matai, when do you say Shema? Maybe first tell us what Shema is. Okay, hold that thought. From when do you say Shema in the evening? From the time when the Kohanim, you got a lot of Kohens and Levites here, enter to partake of the Cheruma until the end of the first watch. This is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. Every word here needs a lot of commentary, but our objective here is just to get a flavor of a Mishnah and contrast it with Halacha. The sages say until midnight. Rabbi Gamliel says until dawn. How many opinions did we just get over here? 3 opinions. Opening breath of the Mishnah. 3 opinions. It once happened that Rabbi Gamliel's sons returned from a party, and they said to him, we did not read the Shema. Said he to them, if dawn has not yet risen, you are obligated to read, which happens to be a 4th opinion that you could even say Shema until dawn. Not only in this case, but in every case, the sages say until midnight, the mitzvah can be fulfilled until dawn, the mitzvah of burning fats and limbs in the temple till dawn, for all the temple's offerings can be eaten for 1 day. The mitzvah is until dawn. So why did the sages say until midnight? In order to distance a person from transgressing. Next Mishnah. From when do we read Shema? Bear with me. In the morning. From when a person can distinguish between sky blue and white. Maybe the origin of or at least a reference to the talit, which then had techelet, which was blue. So that's why we have a sky blue. Rabbi Elazar said, we're on page 154. From when a person can distinguish between sky blue and leek green. And one should finish it until sunrise. Rabbi Yeshua says 3 hours, as it is the habit of royalty to rise at 3 hours. Third Mishnah. The sages of the school of Shammai say in the evening, every person should recline, and in the morning, everyone should stand, as it says, when you lie down, when you rise. The sages of Hillel say, every person should read after their manner. Everyone should read how they like, freestyle, as it is written, when you go on the way. If so, why does it say when you lie down and when you rise? At the time people lie down, at the time people rise. I know that was a whole lot of information. And if I had to summarize it in 2 sentences, the manner and time that Shema is said in the evening, the manner and time that Shema is said in the morning, many different opinions were presented. That would be a good summary. I hope you'll agree. Now let's take a look at halachic presentation. What we're now going to peek at is something we're going to discuss more at length in the video that we're going to present, unless you'll vote down using the video, and then I'll just tell it to you with my voice. That'll be a decision for a moment. Let's see how Maimonides presents these very same ideas. Are you ready? Hold on to your hat. I know it's a lot of reading. Page 155. Sheila, are you handling all of our reading without a book? Is that all right?
No, I'm fine. I'll get the book tomorrow. No, I'm listening.
But for your convenience, hold on. Please pardon the vertigo. I mean, I don't know if you're getting vertigo, but I would get.
I would get
Oh, you do? So you get, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So I hope we're not triggered.
Okay.
Let's see Maimonides. Maimonides, Rambam, is
That is
one of
not
the
on the-
super important, super essential works of Jewish law. He organizes, codifies, and you'll get more of the history in a moment. The Shema is read twice every day. Should we zoom in a little more? Why not? There we go. The Shema is read twice every day, in the evening and in the morning. How do you know? As it is written, when you lie down, when you rise, Deuteronomy. Meaning, during the time when people lie down to sleep, which is at night, during the time when people get up, which is the day. What does one read? 3 Torah portions. They are Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, and it will be V'haya im Shamoa. That's the 2nd paragraph in Deuteronomy. And Vayomer Hashem, and God said, the 3rd paragraph of that we call the 3rd paragraph of the Shema, which is from Bamidbar or Numbers. Reading these 3 portions in this order is what is called reading the Shema. So what do we establish? Okay. When is the time for reading the Shema? In the evening. The mitzvah can be fulfilled from when the stars come out until midnight. However, says Maimonides, if a person transgressed and delayed, as long as they read the Shema before dawn, they fulfill their obligation, as the rule until midnight was said only in order to distance a person from negligence. When is the time by day? You left it on the table here? When is the time by day? The mitzvah is to begin reading before sunrise, so as to conclude the reading of the Shema and make the last blessing with the rising of the sun. This interval is about 1/10 of an hour before sunrise. One who delayed and read Shema after sunrise does his obligation, as the time for reading the Shema for one who delayed is until the end of the first 3 hours. Question, and we'll show this on the screen with the slides. What are the main differences between text 3 and text 4, the Mishnah and Rambam? I kind of gave you a number of clues, but well, I guess I can tell you that. Both documents have the same law, but in different ways. How are they different? Any ideas? Give me a single sentence. Any ideas how they differ?
Text 4, they say like it should be this, but you can do it a different way. So you have
The second text. Okay, meaning it's a little more.
a little more concrete,
Okay,
but still
some variability.
The beginning, think more about the time. In the second paragraph, talk about what you read. More about the reading, the context.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Nisim, you want to tell us the difference between text 3, text 4, Mishnah versus Maimonides? They don't usually get a chance to fight against each other, so we're doing something very special. Any thoughts?
Well, Maimonides, Rambam is more specific. He goes into more detail, and he gives more of an
Okay.
explanation. Whereas the sages of the Mishnah are basically recording just the disputes. Like they assume we already know what's going on.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So item number 1 really is a certain built-in assumptions. The Mishnah assumes the reader of the Mishnah knows a whole lot of information. The Rambam starts off by saying, hey, folks, there's something called Shema. You got to say it because the Torah says to say it. Here's what you got to say. The Rambam gives all the details. He makes no assumptions. The Mishnah makes a major assumption. Number 1. Number 2, the Mishnah records many opinions. The first thing we noted was in the first breath, we had 3 opinions and then a 4th opinion. The Rambam only records the final halachic ruling. He does let us know that if you mess up, there's a backstop. If you miss the first deadline, there is a second deadline. But he only tells you an opinion, not multiple opinions. Because, well, we'll talk about the because in a moment. But the fast because is the Rambam is not trying to cram information. He's not trying to preserve information for all time. The Rambam is trying to inform the reader the halacha, what you actually got to do. That is difference number 2, an important difference. And we could do this with many, many, many texts, but we chose the very first halacha, the first discussion of the Mishnah. Number 3, the Mishnah parenthetically drops in a whole bunch of other information. We're talking about deadlines in the context of Shema, and before you turn around, we're already talking about temple deadlines. Temple, Shema. The Shema is something that every Jew does. The temple is a highly specific detail that's really relevant for the priests and those who are working in the temple. The Mishnah doesn't mind to throw those things in from left field. Pardon the baseball analogy. Whereas in the Mishnah Torah, each law is organized in its own section. So number 1, just to recap, the Mishnah, I'll start filling the details. Who was the Mishnah addressing? Who was the primary reader of the Mishnah? Answer, the great Chachamim who are committing this text to memory. The Mishnah really is more like shorthand prompts to facilitate a conversation. If I had to give you an analogy of what the Mishnah is like the text that we're giving over here. They're prompts that inspire a dialogue. They are not the fullness of the dialogue. So they are being given specifically in shorthand, only enough information to recreate and preserve the broader body of information. Whereas the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam, is a halachic work. The assumption is that any Jew could open up the book and read it and have information. The Mishnah is preserving the original data that's going to be necessary for all different types of analysis. And so we need to record all the opinions because all the opinions may ultimately become relevant. The Rambam is talking to an end user who wants to know what to do. And so he doesn't want to confuse you. He wants to simplify things. And for that very same reason, the Mishnah is all about preserving all this data in the shortest way possible. So sometimes you want to bundle. You'll piggyback and sneak in another discussion into the discussion of the Shema. Halacha, especially the way the Rambam does halacha, which we'll discuss more, wants everything very well organized in its own section. And so we can see here is that what superficially seems like we're doing the very same job, but really doing something very different. The Mishnah was a vehicle for preserving the whole body of Torah knowledge in the shortest way possible to be preserved and recorded by great scholars. And the Mishnah is there for the masses. In other words, this very well records and is a snapshot of a simple fact. Originally, the method of preserving Jewish Torah information was learning from people. And this was a text to assist a person-to-person transmission. Whereas the Halacha, the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam represents book learning. Information that's going to be made available and preserved in texts. In the words of our beautiful slides here, the Mishnah was transcribed to ensure the oral Torah is not forgotten, and all opinions must be transcribed to document the process. The Mishnah Torah is a halachic guidebook. So, really briefly, during the Talmudic era, written books were mainly used to remember what the sages taught, but they were a springboard for a dialogue. In the post-Talmudic era, all of a sudden, books became the objective, the source of knowledge. And let's be real. How much information would have been lost if not for these books? How much information was lost in the absence of books? And so really, and this does a better job, you'll notice that the specialized Torah works that focus on a specific genre, proliferate at the close of the Talmud. The moment the Talmud is finished, the Talmud is this commingling of all Jewish knowledge. All of a sudden, we have different genres. Halacha, Jewish thought, ethics, philosophy, Kabbalah. They used to be, and they all are informed and extracted from the Talmud. But after the close of the Talmud, we have a series of specialized work which allow us to really properly collect, sort, and preserve the information in the written book. And just to go back one more time, before the Talmud, there was an attempt to write down as little as possible. The Talmud represents that massive change where not only is writing permitted, but everything is going to be committed to writing. What else changed?
Right.
Well, the Talmud, as we pointed out last week, I'm sorry, give me one moment, was the last universal text. When it comes to halacha, the work of halacha is to present a final behavior, a final practice, but you may have divergent authorities giving slightly different perspectives. And that, my dear friends, was somewhat of an introduction. Now, I want to take a vote, and I'm not going to be insulted. I'm not going to tell you what I'd prefer. We have two choices now. We're going to do what we've been doing in the videos, giving a very fast overview of a lot of information, a lot of different halachic works. There's around a 10-minute video, which will give the information better than I can, because I'm doing this freestyle, and they probably did many takes to get it right. But on the other hand, it's a 10-minute video, which is a little bit of a fast-paced thing. My vote is to show the video, but if you'd prefer I give you the information, I will accept the majority opinion. And again, my vote is to do the video, but I want you to tell me what you would prefer. Raise your hand if the video is what you'd like to do.
Video.
Okay, great. Thank you. You're all very compassionate and kind. And so we're going to show the video. It's a 10-minute video. We're going to have to hold the questions to the end. But if we have any specific questions, I want to also draw your attention to a brilliant work called The Tree of Halacha, page 158. You're going to have to turn your book sideways. And this is going to be, we're going to be taking a tour of this whole tree, recording many different names, objectives, goals. And before we start, I just want to I want to throw out one thing for you, which is that our halachic tree is color-coded. And you're going to hear this in the video. The halachic tree, which is on page 158, it's color-coded, and it notes 4 different colors to represent 4 different types of halachic works. Halachic digests of the Talmud, which we'll understand soon what that means. Halachic codes, that's going to be the green is digests, blue is codes, red is commentary, and yellow, which is on the side, is responsa. It sounds like Chinese to you right now, but we'll watch the video. It's going to all make sense. So again, page 158 and 159, a brilliant but a little bit dizzying halachic tree. I'm going to hide myself so you can see the full video. And please sit back, relax. Well, okay, here we'll see it on the screen first. So you got it. The digests, which isolate the rulings. You'll understand what that is in a moment. Codes arrange the laws by topic, like Maimonides. Commentaries explain the earlier halachic documents. And responsa are specific queries, specific questions in Jewish law. And now I present to you. Actually, hold on. Focus on the video on Zoom. Do you hear?
No.
No.
You don't hear. I didn't share.
No.
A key book in the library.
Okay.
Now tell me.
Yes.
Yes, we see it.
You see it. Now just tell me if you don't hear it. We got it. Fantastic.
A key book in the Library of Judaism is the Shulchan Aruch, also known as the Code of Jewish Law. The Shulchan Aruch is often described as the Jew's user manual for life. What's in the Shulchan Aruch? When was it written? Who wrote it? Why does the Shulchan Aruch, among the many other books on Jewish practice written over the centuries, occupy such a unique place on the Jewish bookshelf? The Shulchan Aruch is actually a combination of 2 different works composed in the 16th century in 2 different places by 2 different authors. To understand what these 2 great Torah sages achieved, we first need to take a closer look at the field of halacha, Torah law. Halacha is the bottom line of Judaism, where the Torah's teachings translate into the do's and don'ts of daily life. It covers every area of life, from religious ritual to business dealings to interpersonal relationships. In all these and more, the Torah teaches us right from wrong and shows us how to lead a righteous and godly life. Where do these laws and practices come from? Basically, halacha has 3 sources. The first source of halacha is biblical law, which derives from the text of the Torah, as expounded by the halachic midrashim and the Talmud. Halacha also includes rabbinical laws, rules and regulations enacted by the Torah sages of each generation, by the authority vested in them in the Torah. Finally, Jewish practice includes minhagim, customs arising from Jewish life and hallowed by generations of practice. In each generation, Torah scholars and halachic authorities called poskim authored books documenting and discussing these laws. This chart lists some of the primary books of halacha written over the centuries. Let's take a closer look at the tree of halacha depicted here. You will notice that the halachic works fall under 4 general categories. One type is the halachic codes, marked in blue on this chart. A code is a book that organizes laws by subject. Halachic codes focus primarily on the final rulings and practical applications, rather than the laws, sources, reasons, and divergent opinions. A second type of halachic work is halachic commentaries, marked in red. A commentary is a work written as an accompaniment to an earlier work. The commentary discusses and explains the parent work. It may also cite opinions from other sources and argue with other commentaries on how to understand parent work. A third type of halachic works is halachic digests of the Talmud, marked in green. A digest is a summary of an earlier work. For example, the Talmud contains many halachic rulings, but these are obscured by the profusion of discussions, disputations, and case studies. The halachic digests of the Talmud isolate these rulings from the Talmudic text. The fourth type of halachic works is halachic responsa, marked in yellow. A responsum is a written response by a halachic authority to a specific halachic question that's presented to him. A typical responsum may run for many pages, citing and analyzing dozens of sources from the Talmud, the Talmudic commentaries, the halachic codes, and their commentaries, as well as previous responsa. It will then weigh the merits of several proposed solutions before rendering its decision. Now that we have defined the various types of halachic works, let us take a tour of the tree of halachic works you see here on the screen, and learn about the books and authors that represent major milestones in the history of halacha. The most primary source of Torah law is, of course, the Torah itself.
Nisim, you don't hear the sound? Nisim? You don't see the video? I just paused it. Until then, you saw it or not?
I see it.
Which contains the
Okay, good.
613 mitzvot, or biblical commandments, along with the laws communicated to Moses at Sinai and transmitted orally through the generations. For many generations, these laws, as well as the detailed explanations of the laws written in the Torah, were transmitted by word of mouth from teacher to disciple, until they were recorded in the very first halachic code, the Mishnah, by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi 1800 years ago. The next major documentation of Torah law was the voluminous commentary on the Mishnah known as the Talmud. The Talmud records many thousands of discussions by hundreds of sages extending over 7 generations and more than 300 years. When the Talmud was redacted in the beginning of the 6th century, it was the most comprehensive record of Torah law compiled up until that point. After the Talmud came the Gaonim, who for 500 years headed the great Torah academies in Babylonia. The Gaonim wrote commentaries and digests on the Talmud. They also authored numerous responses to halachic queries that were sent to them from Jewish communities all across the world. During the Gaonic era, the entire Jewish world looked to the great yeshivot of Babylonia as the authority on all matters of Torah law. But beginning in the 11th century, a period known as the era of the Rishonim, there emerged centers of Torah learning throughout the Jewish diaspora, in North Africa, Spain, and Western and Southern Europe. One of the early Rishonim was Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, known as Rif, who lived and taught in Morocco and Spain. The Rif authored the most important halachic work of his time, a halachic digest of the Talmud. Another important digest of the Talmud was compiled about 250 years later by the Rosh. The Rishonim also authored many of the great commentaries on the Talmud, without which the Talmud would be a closed book to us today. While these commentaries are not halachic works per se, their explanations and discussions of Talmudic passages determine how many points of Torah law are applied. The Rishonim also wrote many thousands of halachic responsa, applying their Talmudic knowledge to issues of the day. But the most important developments in the literature of halacha in this period are 2 major halachic codes. The first is the halachic code completed in the year 1180 by Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, also known as Maimonides, or the Rambam. Maimonides titled his code Mishnah Torah, which means review of the Torah. Indeed, Mishnah Torah is the only halachic code that covers all areas of Torah law, including laws pertaining to the service in the Holy Temple and the agricultural laws that apply only in the land of Israel. Mishnah Torah systemized all the laws in the Talmud, as well as the rulings of the Gaonim during the nearly 700 years from the closing of the Talmud to Maimonides' own time. But as monumental and comprehensive a work this code was, it would still not be the final word on halacha. New halachic questions kept on being raised. Furthermore, not all of the halachas agreed with Maimonides' conclusions. For example, the Ravad, Rav Avraham ben David of Puskiris, authored glosses on the Mishnah Torah in which he presents his disagreements with one of Maimonides' rulings. Consequently, in the generations following Maimonides, many more halachic works of all four types, digests, codes, commentaries, and responsa, were written. About 150 years after Maimonides, a major halachic code was compiled in Spain by Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, the son of the Rosh. While this code was more limited in that it only included laws that were relevant to Jewish life at that time, it expanded on Maimonides' code by including rulings from dozens of halachic works composed parallel to Maimonides' code and in the generations that followed. Rabbi Yaakov organized his code into 4 turim, or columns, each covering a different area of halacha: Orach Chaim, way of life; Yoredea, instructor of knowledge; Even HaEzer, stone of salvation; and Choshen Mishpat, breastplate of judgment. After the Tur published his code, many great halachists wrote commentaries on this work. As we will see, 2 of these commentaries form the basis for the next major halachic code, the Shulchan Aruch. During the era of the Rishonim, 2 primary schools of halacha had formed, each with its own unique customs and traditions. The Sephardic school, followed by the Jewish communities of Spain, Southern Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, and the Ashkenazic school, followed by the communities of Western, Central, and Eastern Europe. For example, Rif and Maimonides were both Sephardic sages. On the other hand, the author of the Tur tended more toward the rulings and customs of the Ashkenazic traditions, contained in the works of the Tosafists, his father the Rosh, and other Ashkenazic halachic authorities. The beginning of the 16th century saw a shift of focus among the halachists. These Acharonim, or later sages as they're called, did not, as a rule, consider themselves qualified to argue with the Torah sages of earlier generations, the Rishonim. Thus, while the Rishonim looked to the Talmud and the writings of the Gaonim as their primary sources of halachic rulings, the halachic works, composed by the Acharonim, focus on navigating the rulings and opinions of the Rishonim. The same is true of the 2 great sages, Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Moshe Isserles, both of the first generation of Acharonim who gave us the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is the product of 2 earlier works by these 2 halachic giants. Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote a commentary on the Tur, which he titled Beis Yosef, the House of Yosef. In this work, Karo developed a distinctive approach to deciding between differing rulings among the halachists. He regarded 3 major halachists, Rif, Maimonides, and Rosh, as the big 3. Whenever he encountered a difference of opinion among the early halachists, he would decide the law according to the majority view among these 3. Rabbi Yosef Karo then proceeded to compile a code of his own, the Shulchan Aruch, which means set table. The Shulchan Aruch follows the same 4-column format as that of the Tur, chapter by chapter. But Rabbi Yosef Karo felt that the Tur's rulings tended more toward those of the Ashkenazic Rishonim. In his code, he implemented his big 3 halachic approach, which gave more weight to the Sephardic halachic traditions. While Rabbi Yosef Karo was writing his Shulchan Aruch in the city of Tzfat, the Ashkenazic halachist, Reb Moshe Isserles, the Ramah, was also laboring to codify the halachic rulings of the Rishonim. Ramah had also written a running commentary on the Tur, and was creating his own halachic code. But when Karo's Shulchan Aruch was published in 1563, Ramah felt that his own work was now superfluous. So instead of publishing his own code of Jewish law, Ramah wrote glosses on Karo's Shulchan Aruch, in which he noted those areas in which he disagreed with Karo's conclusions, and where he felt the need to add additional laws and customs not included in Karo's work. The 2 works were subsequently published together, with Ramah's glosses inserted in a different font within Rabbi Yosef Karo's text. The combined work, which essentially summarized the bottom line of halachic rulings up until their time, now became the fundamental code of Jewish law, on which hundreds of subsequent halachic commentaries and codes were authored, representing a great variety of customs and practices, but all looked to the Shulchan Aruch as the documentation of the grand halachic consensus, incorporating both of the two major halachic traditions of the Jewish people.
Alrighty, folks, pop quiz. Okay, no kidding. Here we go. This is screen loading. All right, so we just did really fast, really briefly, and I want to see everybody back. I hope. Here. How do we do that?
Not sure. Not
No. I need to here. Stop hiding. Where's the? Oh, here. There we go. All right, folks. So really briefly, what we just did is spend 10 minutes. Yeah, a lot of information, but if you have the map, basically you move downwards. That's the passage of time. Color coding the different genres, and on the very side, the different grays show different distinct eras of Jewish scholarship. And so, a lot of information to say that the process of clarifying, presenting, and extracting the halachic information, basically, the Torah's instruction towards Jewish practice, is an ongoing and constant process. Sometimes clarifying earlier works, other times composing new structures and organizations of those ideas. And the most important punchline of this whole discussion is, of course, to note that we have the work called the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, which is a code organizing Jewish behavior according to subject. And almost all works after the composition of the work, the Shulchan Aruch, are hedged, based, and connected to that work. And that really is the gist of this 10-minute video. Many different ideas. Again, that is your halachic map. Bookmark this, and very interesting, very important. And maybe I hope it gives a little clarity about this word, this murky word, halacha, or Jewish law. Hey, Alon. But now what we got to do is we got to actually experience a little bit about the halachic process. In other words, why are there so many updates, so many additions? And the answer is because life keeps on changing. New information, new scenarios arise that may have never been directly conceived or addressed. And so there is a process in addressing a new question, trying to find the best applicable background. You're not a lawyer by any chance, are you? No, I'm kidding. We have some lawyers, but they're going to be watching the video. And so you have to develop a case. And the same way you have to develop a case, you have to go through the process. And so every generation, there are new issues and new questions. Just to give you one interesting, and that's really the gist of this process, where in every era, every generation, there needs to be an upgrade, revision, not because we're changing the Jewish law, but we're applying Jewish law to a new case. And anytime there is a question, this Jewish tree might be used to go back in time and to find earlier precedent, earlier ideas and concepts to figure out Jewish law. So, for example,
The Shulchan Aruch was supposed to be
the final,
at that time,
yes, and it was.
but they added in the other rabbis' comments who disagreed with things.
So sometimes it's disagreeing or helping, because although it was meant to be authoritative, there really were other authorities. But much of the commentary on the Shulchan Aruch is not really disagreeing with the Shulchan Aruch. It's further isolating and identifying additional details that may have not been addressed. And so an example, that's a nice example, is we talk about the laws of kosher. So laws of kosher, you cannot cook milk and meat together with heat. Well, what about a microwave? A microwave, and then another question, all to cook on Shabbat. You can't make a fire. What about a microwave? Is a microwave, the item gets hot, but it's not fire. And so how do you figure that out? And so you would go through here and you think, what would be similar or some type of comparison? So the Talmud talks about heat, cooking by fire, cooking by the heat of the sun, cooking by the reflection or the channel, the harnessing of the sun. The Talmud talks about hot springs, natural hot springs. And so I'm not going to tell you how they decide, but you can understand there's a lot of precedent and other conversations. And then you'd have to assess, analyze, and ultimately try to come up with some kind of conclusion. And so this halachic tree is very helpful in researching, as well as knowing the hierarchy, the history, and the development of those questions. And so one more time, what is halacha? What is Jewish law? Jewish law is the instruction of how the Torah would like or suggest that a person should live. And it's based on the halachic works that we talk about are those ideas extracted, developed, and clarified throughout the ages. Now, what we need to do is, as advertised, we need to get a little taste for the halachic process. And this is how we're going to spend our next few minutes, understanding the halachic process. And we're going to go through a very emotional, important, but fraught topic, because it's a topic of life and death. And there's nothing more important than life and death. That's everything. And so, page 160, it's a halachic case study of can one save one life at the expense of the other? But we need a backup. And so how do we know that Jewish law, I'm sorry, let me just make one more comment. So many times you have a question, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Can you use a microwave on Shabbat? Well, then you have to find a contemporary discussion. But what if a little drop of milk falls into a big pot of cholent or chicken soup? You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You could call your rabbi or open the Code of Jewish Law, and you'll know that you're not allowed to cook meat and milk together. But if it's the slightest drop and it's less than 1/60th of the total pot, Jewish law determines that it's kosher. When it's more complicated, that's where you need to go through this whole process. And one of the most fascinating genres of Jewish literature, in my opinion, and I love this, is responsa. In Hebrew, she'elot uteshuvot, questions and answers. Why is responsa so fascinating? Well, there's the primary reason, there's the reason why I like it. Responsa many times is an accurate snapshot of what Jewish life was at the time the question was asked. So if there's a question about the treatment of or the redeeming of captives, you understand there was a proliferation of Jewish people being kidnapped or sold into slavery, which is miserable and terrible, but it's important to have information about what people were going through. And if there's a talk about a runaway or someone who ran away from the Jewish community and joined the church, well, then we understand that there was this dynamic, right? And so all these different responses can be an insight into life. But we're going to talk about a specific issue. The issue of pikuach nefesh. What is pikuach nefesh? Saving a life. Now, we know that in Judaism, you got to save a life. A life is very important. Why? Please join me. Text 5. We begin from the beginning. Genesis 1:27. God created the human in his image. In the image of God, he created male and female. He created them. So what do we know? God created human beings in his image. And which takes us to text. We understand human life is important. It's in the image of God. Well, it gets more real because in the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, which is actually a medrashic halachic, a medrash halacha, page 161. How were the 10 commandments given? 5 on one, 5 on the other. On the first tablet, it says, I am the Lord your God. Opposite it, on the second tablet, it says, do not murder. This teaches us, one who spills blood, it's as if you have diminished the statute of the Almighty, and this is a respectable way of saying it's as if you've killed the Almighty. Because human life is so important, it overrides almost every single Jewish law. We actually have this explicitly in text 7, also 161. You shall keep my statutes and my laws, which a person shall do and live by them. I am God. Says the Talmud, text 8. I know we're going fast. With all the transgressions of the Torah, if a person is told, transgress so you will not be killed, they should be transgressed, not killed. Live by them, not die by them. Chai bahem, v'lo sheyamut bahem. All principles of the Torah are suspended for the preservation of human life. How important is it to save human life? Just catching up here on the slides. Hold on, but let's just take a look. I just want to show, I should have showed this before. Visualize. You see a line the first 5 and the second 5. So I'm the Lord, your God corresponds to do not murder. Text 7. The Jewish law is to live by it, not to die by it. The Talmud then comments. The Talmud then makes that commentary, that clarification. Now, what if there's only the slightest chance of saving human life? Is it worthwhile to desecrate Jewish law? The answer, absolutely. Comes the Mishnah, text 9. I'll use the summary because it's getting late. In the case of a fallen building, a building collapses, God forbid. If there is the slightest possibility that people were present, we clear the rubble and search, even on Shabbat. If someone is found alive, we still continue the search because to save a life, we violate even the most important laws of Shabbat to save human life. All of this sounds quite simple, but the Talmud makes an important comment. So we're seeing the progression from a verse in the Torah to a Mishnah to the Talmud. Isn't it obvious? Again, I'm paraphrasing the text on page 163 based on the slides. Isn't it obvious that we continue to search if someone was found alive? Right? The Mishnah here says, if someone is found alive, we continue. Isn't it obvious? Pshita. Sorry. The Mishnah is saying that any living person, even if mortally wounded, we would say they're almost not alive. They should still be rescued, which is the degree of how far we value human life. Not only we value human life, we value human life even if it's only dangling by a thread. Why? So here we're going to come into the next step. This text 11, is from Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi called the Rif, and this is the first work that actually makes it into our halachic tree as a halachic digest, I believe. Yeah, a halachic digest. If you want to flip back to 158, it's right where the line that says Rishonim, you'll see it's that green box. It's one of the early important halachic works. Rif, it's on page 158, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. So what does he explain? A dying and living person have the same legal status in every regards. Actually, let's take a look inside. Page 272. I'm sorry, 163. A dying person has the legal status of a living person in every regard, in every respect. As it is written, not until the silver cord snaps, meaning one who touches a dying person to hasten their death is a murderer. The point is, human life at any state is incredibly valuable. Okay, so until this point, we've established very strongly that Judaism values human life. Can you get to the point already? Isn't it obvious? Okay, here's where it gets complicated. Comes the Talmud. You know the Talmud tune? Comes the Talmud, and we talk about Psachim, tractate Psachim, and tells us a story. Here's the story. Ready for the story? Page 164. A person came before Rava and said to him, the chieftain of my village said to me, you kill so-and-so, and if you do not do so, I will kill you. Rava tells him, let yourself be killed rather than you should kill. This sounds like a bubby, the way it's worded. No, kill yourself rather than you should kill. Why do you think their blood is redder? Your blood is redder than theirs. This is a famous line. Whose blood is redder? Perhaps the blood of that person is redder, which really means to say, you don't get to choose. You don't get to choose and to decide that your life is more important than somebody else. Now, let's understand why it was even a conversation. Why it is a question? Well, we said you suspend all of Jewish law to live. One of the Jewish laws is not to kill. Could we suspend the law of not killing to save your own life? And the obvious answer is no, you cannot. You cannot kill another person's life. Who is to say that your life is more important than somebody else? Why? What's the logic here? Who decides whose blood is redder? So for that, we have Rashi. Getting dizzy? Rashi says as follows, is summarized. Pikuach nefesh principle. The principle that we suspend all law states that mitzvot are put aside to save a life. But if one life is saved and another is destroyed, then they balance each other out, and the pikuach nefesh principle, the principle that says we push everything aside, does not apply. And so usually you can break the Torah to save your life. But because to save your life would take another life, we put aside the rule of pikuach nefesh, and you're not allowed to take another person's life to save your own. Prohibition of murder remains in force. Okay, you can't kill. Is that the end of the conversation? No, because what happens if you have the famous jug scenario, Talmud Baba Mitzia, 166. Two people are in the desert. One of them has a jug of water. If they share it, they both die. If one drinks, he'll make it to the next 7-Eleven. So what do? Here you see two opinions. Ben Petora says they both should drink. Don't you be the one to cause your friend to die. Which sounds beautiful and nice, but that's a waste of two lives. So comes Rabbi Akiva, who's the compassionate one, and says, keep the water for yourself. Your life comes first. Your life comes first. I thought you just said who decides whose life is redder, whose blood is redder than the other. What a miserable position to be in, to have to decide whose life is better, more valuable. Isn't it the same case as the chieftain says, kill somebody or be killed? Drink the water or die? Why don't we say here too? How do you don't get to choose? There's a very big difference. In the murder case, you're taking a life. Over here, you're not taking a life. You're just not doing life preserving. You're not doing a life preserving act. You're not sharing your water, but you're not taking their life. And so therefore, if the water is in your hand, you have to provide for yourself. You don't have to sacrifice for yourself in order for someone else. We don't decide who will live and die. God decides that. But you are allowed and required to hold on to your thing. And it's very different to say murder versus saving yourself. Which takes us, so again, we have these two different scenarios aligned. And the difference is text 15. Here is a halachic work that explains the difference. When the water belongs to one of the travelers, can you grab it? Who lives and who dies is not up to us. You cannot hand somebody over to die. But you can preserve yourself. Let's read text 15 inside. In the case of the two travelers, where the law is that one who has the water may drink, page 167, to save his own life, it's based on the principle, your life comes before your fellow. You always have to put yourself first. But if you would grab the water away from your friend, that would not be allowed. So to not give your water away, don't give it away. But you're not allowed to grab the water from someone else. Because there you are making a proactive choice to take someone else's life. And so halachically, there is a distinction between inactivity and action. You can't hurt someone's life, but you could do something if you're not actively taking or threatening their life. Which is what text 16 comes for. And we're getting to a specific point, so bear with me another moment. If you have a group of travelers and they encounter a heathen who says, give us one of your folks or all of you die, what do? Everyone dies. Because there, you have to take proactive action to hand the person over. It's not just not giving them water. You're taking action. You don't get to decide. Better everybody should die. So, because here's the thing. If we're weighing one life against the other, then of course a multitude of lives should be more valuable than one life. But Torah law does not allow us to ever proactively take a single life. Exactly. But the point is, Jewish law does not allow you to take someone else's life. To take that person and hand them over, you're taking their life. That's action. That's intervention. That's like stealing the water bottle. But just to hold on, you're not doing anything. Facts of life are being acted upon you. Which leads us to a most painful question, which is call it the punchline. Throughout history, Jews have been confronted with very, very miserable, tough choices. And one of the most miserable, terrible, unimaginable times, of course, is the Holocaust. And before Jews were taken to the camps, there is a work called Sheilot Utshuvot Me'emek HaBacha, halachic responsa from in the gates of hell during the Holocaust. And there's a rabbi called Rabbi Ephraim Oshri, who wrote down after the war a number of questions that he was asked under the shadow of the Nazis, Yimach Shemam V'Zichram. He was a rabbi in Lithuania in the Kovna ghetto. This is personal, by the way, because my ancestors come from that region, not Kovna, but the region of Kovna. They come from a small village outside of Kovna. And some of the questions he was asked seem minor. Like, can you say the prayer of, he didn't make me a slave, if you are being treated as a slave? One of the most miserable questions, text 17, and this is the punchline of where we're heading with all these different discussions about human life, is the following question. 169. And we're going to turn to 170. Doctor, welcome on board. On L165701, September 8th, 1941, the Nazi SS Oberführer, the commander, Guk, arrived in Lithuania. And he is the vicious animal who ended up liquidating the Kovna ghetto. His reputation of this evil and bloodthirsty murderer preceded him, evoking panic among those imprisoned in the ghetto. As soon as he arrived, he executed a number of Jews. And at the time, there was the issue of white cards. White cards were cards that were given to a select number of people who were afforded the opportunity to escape the ghetto and possibly have their freedom, be able to live, to survive to live another day. And here was the question. The matter was as follows. Yarden, the German commander of the Kovna ghetto, told the Jewish council to distribute among the workers in the ghetto 5,000 white cards that he gave them. So he gave them 5,000 people to be saved. Those individuals would be the only ones allowed to remain in the ghetto with their families, while the rest are liquidated. At the time, there were 30,000 Jews, including 10,000 workers. So the Jewish council has to decide who lives and dies. 5,000 cards. What's the question? No, how they choose, they didn't ask the rabbi. And again, this is a political issue. I don't want to get into it now. It's very, very painful. But there was another question that he was asked. Look at the question. I was asked, are those who grab white cards for themselves to say themselves acting properly? Can you take one of these cards if you know that by taking this card, someone else's life will not be saved? What's the question here? And it's a miserable question. And imagine being a young rabbi having to give an answer. Can you take a card or not? Are you proactively saving your life? Or are you saving your life by taking the life of another? Are you deciding one person's blood is redder than the other or not? So on one hand, you're not allowed to take action to save yourself if it's going to be taking someone else's life. But on the other hand, you can refrain from doing something to save someone else's life if it's going to be at your expense. So which case is the stealing of a white card more akin to?
You're not talking about people that gave them to, you're saying, can you grab them?
Can you grab it from the office? Yes. Very important point. It's going to be an important part of the analysis. So Rabbi Ashri says, is it like taking someone's life by saving your own? Or are you just refraining from giving someone else life-saving resources? Rabbi Ashri's opinion? Want to guess what his opinion was?
You're taking somebody else's car.
So to steal someone's card out of their hand, that would be like taking the water. But if it's in a central location and by you stealing it, someone else is not going to have that card?
It's a big difference. If that's the man who owns the white card, you pick up a card for me. There's no one got the card.
Oh, so was it designated?
You got the card.
Video.
But if you give it to
That's
someone,
what our friend Mr. Cohen is
you kill
saying.
the other person, then you kill the other person.
Yeah, the Torontonians are agreeing here. So let's take a look on the screen real fast. And this is where we're going to wind down with this. There's two precedents. It's forbidden to take action to result in the death of another. One is permitted to refrain from saving another. Which one is the white cards? So here are the two factors, and we already alluded to this in the room. No one was being handed over to the Germans. The Germans were just going to only allow those who had the cards to say. Number two, and again, this is a miserable conversation. Can you imagine these? By the way, one of the terrible things the Nazis did is they tried to dehumanize us by forcing us to make these impossible decisions. The second point, the white cards were not yet possessed by anyone, and that's what our dear Torontonian friends are saying. His conclusion was that as long as they have not been appropriated, if you could get your hands on one of them, you could. Because you are not taking the lives of another. You're just seizing neutral resources that are out there in a public domain. And indeed, he pointed to this conclusion based on a reading in the Code of Jewish Law. The same Code of Jewish Law we talked about. Text 18, which I'm going to say outside because of time. One may save oneself from damage, even if others will be affected. You can save yourself even if the byproduct, the result is that someone will be affected. But once the damage has arrived, one cannot take measures that would deflect it towards others. So, preemptively to grab the card, you could do. But once people are being rounded up or once the resources are distributed, you cannot seize it. Preventative measures are okay. Reactive actions are not. So Ashri said, once selected for deportation, one could not save themselves at another's expense. So God forbid there's a line and you know that by running away, someone else will be taken. You might not. I'm not saying you can't run away, but that would be what he's saying. But before the decree is instituted, meaning no one has been rounded up, it is not active harm. Therefore, he said stealing a card was deemed permissible. This was a question he was asked in the Covenant ghetto, real time, real life, and he had to make this miserable. He was asked a miserable question, and he had to give the answer. Ira?
I asked the question seriously. It came to mind as a joke. In a lighter but threatening situation where there's bandits or whatever, not can the victims rush the bandits? Are we allowed to?
We are allowed to. That's a very good question, actually. But you reminded me of another question. You know the two guys that are on a camping trip? And the bear, there's a bear coming, and the guy starts running. The friend asks him, why are you running? You can't outrun the bear. So I just need to outrun you. Oh, yeah. It's hard to make a joke, to make light. But, sometimes you have to break up the tension. And so, being that the calamity had not yet arisen, there was not yet a, how do you call it? Axion or whatever you call it. They were not yet rounding the folks up. So then, the resource was in a central location. It wasn't appropriated. He could take it. But God forbid, had he waited till later time, it would have not been allowed. So, painful moment. This is just one instance, a miserable instance, where there were many questions, many perspectives, but the bottom line was the determination that Rabbi Ashri gave. And the reality is that every day we confront these kind of questions. And if we allow ourselves to engage in the process or seek out those who have access to that process, one can gain clarity, purpose, and direction in every part of human living. My dear friends, what a way to finish the conversation about halacha. But halacha really is a turning point where we turn to focus inwards, practical, executable behavior. And the halacha itself addresses every part of human life, societal, personal, every time of day, every stage of human living, and every facet of life. One of the famous things that Jews like to point out, although others point it out as a way to deride the Jewish people, is that Judaism even talks about how to wake up in the morning, how to sit up, how to tie your shoes. And the purpose is not to be overwhelmed. I don't think we're supposed to make ourselves crazy, but to know that every step we take has value, significance, purpose, and it's a chance to connect to God, to our people, and to a rich 3,000 plus year heritage. And so as we go through life and many things become second nature, we can feel good knowing that so many things that we are doing are actually the execution or the fulfillment of halacha, the specific advice that Jewish law and Jewish tradition gives us. And every time we do that, we're channeling God's blessing and God's presence. And that's all what is informed to us through halacha. Next week, we're going to get onto a totally different direction. Musar and Jewish philosophy, which, if I may say so, halacha may be in a sense the most simple. It's not simple at all, but it's straightforward. Musar and philosophy is going to, you're telling me, Rabbi, that was not straightforward. Musar and Jewish philosophy is one of the least understood and least familiar aspects of Jewish law. We love to argue. We love to debate. We love to ponder. Please join us next week, Wednesday night, as we go and engage in lesson 5 of the Jewish Learning Institute. Folks, who are here in person, folks on Zoom, and my many dear friends who, for a variety of reasons, will be watching this recording in the near future. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining. I don't know if this is the easiest ride, but it's an essential journey to clarify all about Jewish knowledge and scholarship. Thank you for coming along for the ride. Have a wonderful evening. Toda rabah.